Hi, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. This is Winton Churchill with the Barefoot Consultants, and we're here on Freelance Friday to talk a little bit about what my North Star was for finding my way into freelancing. And my North Star, uh, and just by way of explanation, for those of you who may not know, is oftentimes a North Star is a form of navigation, a tool used in navigation. It's an actual star, and at night you can see the star, and you can even either go in the direction of the star, or you can go in the at an offset to the star or in the opposite direction to the star, but it serves to guide you where you want to go. And so that's what uh, occurred to me in this particular moment. I want to say it was about, let's see, that probably would have been about 30 years ago. And I had worked for a number of technology companies and kind of was right in the middle of my career working for those technology companies. And one of the great aspects of my job is I got to work on things in the aerospace community. So it was very interesting. I was helping to bring advancing computer technology to the world of aerospace in one way or another, and talking about it for people. Explaining how they could take projects they were working on now and uh, ex- expand the role of computing, do more things in more different ways, and all that kind of stuff. So it was, a pretty heady time, a lot of fun as a job. I was based in Southern California, and so I had at different times responsibilities as far south as San Diego, and then as far north as the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in the sort of the northeast corner of Los Angeles, and right around El Segundo there with a lot of the aerospace firms and the Los Angeles Air Force Base that um, a lot of Air Force people were perplexed by the Los Angeles Air Force Base. It had no runways, and just about every other Air Force base at the time had runways. I mean, it was seemed odd to be an Air Force facility and not have runways, and but they were involved with mostly satellites and rocket ships and all that kind of stuff. Weather satellites, uh, communication satellites, all the things that different parts of the government use and the military use to communicate with each other and do their navigation. The GPS program was run out of that facility. So it was very interesting in many uh, different ways, but it was also a job, and it kept me on the road at times and away from my family at times. And uh, a lot of days I would be in my car running around Los Angeles or Orange County, but other days I would be on an airplane. And in fact, one of the uh, years just before I made it into freelancing, I had done just over 120 airline trips in that previous year. So just, a lot of travel. And if any of you have done that, you know that you're kind of a zombie. I mean, you sort of become clear at the time of meetings and that sort of thing, but you're zooming across time zones and eating different food than you're used to eating and all that kind of stuff. So it's very, uh, I mean, it wasn't upsetting. It was just different. It was, dealing with constant change, I guess. And so one day I was on my way up to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Most civilians know it as JPL, and it's where a lot of the Mariner programs and different space and science programs for the last, I don't know, 5 decades, 8 decades, whatever it might be, have come out of that facility. I mean, everything from lunar probes. Mostly my involvement there was with Martian probes and that kind of thing. And the interesting thing, I mean, there's like the Martian probe, and there's the vehicle that launches it and all that kind of stuff. But then there's also the science. There's dozens to hundreds of experiments planned. And so when I would go out, the first thing somebody would do is they would tell me what they were doing and what kind of results they were looking for and that kind of thing. And then I would have a conversation with them about how they could apply new computer technology. It might be in the form of hardware, it might be in the form of software, to give them greater capability than they had. And as we all know, because we all live through this, this stuff has been, growing in leaps and bounds. So usually when a new generation of computers came out or a new release of a software came out, there were pretty big new and exciting things you could do with that. So it was a very enjoyable job. But one day I was on my way up to JPL, and I saw next to me on the 405, and those of you that have ever lived in that area or been out there, I mean, the 405, everybody got on the 405 sooner or later, and I was in the South Bay area, so I had to go on the 405 up until the one of the freeways that crossed over that would take me up to JPL, and you would make the call depending on traffic. And one day, it was a weekday, I think it was a Thursday, something like that. It wasn't a weekend, obviously. And there was an RV next to me in traffic. And of course, I had on a suit and a tie, because that's kind of how you dressed when you were doing that sort of job that I was in. I was going to make a presentation on applying this new technology that we had in this particular situation. And I was looking over at this RV, and there was a guy about my age driving the RV. It was kind of obvious as I looked at it for a little bit. We were in stop and go traffic for probably 20 minutes. So we would just sit there, and you could see some of his kids running around, and presumably his wife sitting in the front, and they were casually dressed and not worried about the time, where I was worried about how long the traffic would be bad and if I would make it to my presentation on time. And of course, pretty much at that time, everybody in Los Angeles gave you a mulligan if you were 10 or 20 minutes late, because the prospects of, traversing LA at that time and being delayed by 20 minutes were not unusual, even if you left early. And so this was how this thing unfolded. But I looked over at that guy, and I was, I guess I wasn't jealous, but I was wondering what he knew that I didn't know, that gave him the ability on a weekday to take off and hang out with his family and go do something that looked like fun, versus going to do something for me that was also fun, but it was also work and meant for a long day. It meant that I had, probably an hour and a half getting there, as much as 3 hours getting home, because the traffic was bad in the afternoon. And, what did he know? And I didn't realize it at the time until decades later, when International Living asked me to write an article about what prompted me to begin thinking about freelancing as a career. And this incident where I was on my way to JPL was a full 15 years before I was able to make that break to freelancing, because back in that day, freelancing was not as easy to break into as it is now. In fact, most people that were freelancers back then were consultants, and they usually had a big body of technical expertise that they were able to take and share with other, you know, people, engineers, scientists, and they were usually attached to a project, like a consultant would be the most accurate name that I could describe with that. And when you're a consultant, you're involved in the project, you're working with the team on a daily basis, frequently on site. And the kind of stuff I was doing was sort of showcasing new technology that they could take advantage of. But once the project started, I didn't, I wasn't on the team other than checking in from time to time and making sure that everything was running smoothly. I wasn't a day-to-day, you know, programmer writing code or mechanical engineer doing designs or whatever that might be. But what I realized is that if this guy could figure out a way to sit in the RV and on a weekday go out and have some fun with his family, that I certainly ought to be able to figure that out. And although I wasn't a rocket scientist at that time, I certainly spent a lot of my days with rocket scientists and working, on things together. So I thought I ought to be able to figure this out. Well, uh, so when I wrote this article for International Living, I was trying to think back as to when I had my earliest inclinations to be a freelancer. And, just as I was kind of rummaging through my brain, thinking about what pushed me in that direction, I realized that it was this particular uh, time. I mean, it wasn't momentous, it wasn't earth shattering, but just to begin thinking about how I could structure my life so I could have more of that freedom. And for fast forward 15 years later, I had thought of lots of different things. I looked at entrepreneurial things. I looked at starting different businesses. But as I really began to study it, it was very difficult to go out and get a freelancing job because at the time most of the jobs were big jobs. You had to know somebody, you had to know a lot about a particular project or technology or something like that. And you usually, at that time, it usually involved getting a contract with the government or getting a contract with a contractor that had a contract with the government and putting all that together. So the threshold to entry on that was rough. And working for the companies that I did, I couldn't even have conversations about potentially going to work or being consultant on different projects because it would have been a conflict of interest. And so very hard to pursue that avenue. And in the late 90s, we started to see these first freelance networks come along. And the interesting thing about a freelance network is most of the jobs on there were small, tiny, write me an article, do some proofreading, that kind of thing. And even though my skills were way beyond that, a way to showcase my skills uh, would be to do simple jobs as you got started on these things. And they typically didn't pay very much, but once your client realized the expertise that you had, then they would be more likely to use you in different ways and pay you more. And this is at the very beginning of those online freelance networks. And what I saw in that was this on ramp, interestingly enough, that you could use by doing small, simple jobs to showcase your expertise to companies that had much larger needs than that simple job. And we've all heard the phrase paying your dues when you go to work for a company. Back then you had to work for the company for a year before they really trusted you as an employee. Maybe they might give you a little promotion or a little more responsibility within the job you already had. They might give you a little raise, but usually that kind of stuff didn't come along until after about a year. and it just took a long time to develop relationships in companies and move up the ladder, and because there were a lot of people in the company that also wanted to move up the ladder, so it was a fairly competitive environment. And this freelancing, as I was dabbling in it, looked pretty interesting. It looked a lot easier to do than going out and getting a big freelancing contract all at once, because that was pretty much what was available for you. And so I began to understand the possibilities in this area, continued to look at these online sites. And in the year 2000, uh, and right at the end, 2000, 2001, I decided to start my own freelancing company. And of course, at that point, I had all the um, uh, concerns that you have when you start a company. I mean, the number one concern was, how do I get health insurance? And I was, I guess you'd say, challenged by doing that. But what I learned is I talked to some people that had already gone through that process, that had their own business. They were already freelancers of one kind or another. And I found that if you form a corporation and you set up a business, that you could get a Blue Cross Blue Shield health insurance policy for your company, even if you were only a company of one. So that's, took probably 10 or 15 hours to figure all that out. But that was dealing with the number one problem I had. And then the number two problem was finding clients. And that would prove to be more daunting. And that is always the challenge for the freelancers, finding clients. And one of the things, as I work with people coming into freelancing today, many don't realize what a gift it is to be able to work on these online networks where all the potential clients are neatly organized. They tell you what they want you to do, and they say, basically, tell me how you would approach this and how much it would cost to have you do this for me. And they look at your proposal and your profile, which is kind of like a resume, but also very different from a resume. And they would also look at your um, just other aspects about your life. On, as many of you know, on sites like Upwork and Freelancer.com and that kind of thing, there's a profile on there, and you talk about your work experience, but you also talk about your life experience if it's relevant to the kind of work that you're really willing to do. So that's uh, what I did. I began getting clients, and I had some uh, people when I left in other technology companies that wanted me to do the same thing for them that I'd done for the other companies. So those turned into sort of the larger, more historical kinds of contracts. But these little tiny jobs were just intriguing over time. And for the first 7 years of my uh, freelancing business, I was able to uh, cobbled together a group of clients that I was working with, and always the first couple of years were, pretty hard. And then things began to smooth out once you had a stream of clients and that kind of thing. And I found working online that I was able to bring freelancers into my business almost as subcontractors to do things like transcriptions, to write articles that I may have needed, to write reports that I may have needed, that kind of thing. And it just opened up this whole world to me. So that's, as I'm doing this, that was 23 years ago. And beginning in 2000, as they say, the rest is history. The world of freelancing has become the opportunity for people to do something on the side. Usually, we talk about it a lot as a side gig, or or that kind of thing. And that's the way many people can start now. And they can do, maybe a few hours a month, but they get the taste of doing that kind of freelancing work, and they move forward in that realm. So, just, and it's funny, after I wrote that article, which was, gosh, I want to say it was 10 or 11 years ago, probably, it just became the reminder point for your North Star, that idea of having the freedom to live your life really on your own terms. Because when I was working for other companies, I really had, there was a lot of showing up at a certain time on a certain day and doing certain things and that kind of stuff. And once you get more into the freelance area, you still might have meetings with clients and brainstorm things, strategize things, that sort of thing. But then you kind of go off and you work independently, which was the real attraction to freelancing to me. And of course, you have control over your time. So if you decide you want to take a 4-day weekend and go off with a family instead of, going to a job Thursday, Friday, and having to be back so you can go again on early Monday morning, this was quite the welcome change of pace to this whole thing. So would love to hear if you have a North Star like that you can, kind of correlate things to. That's, and I see Jeanette's popped a heart up there. Thank you, Jeanette. And also Bob Herb, who actually I worked with back in that time when I was, racing up and down the 405. So he and I worked in the same office and shared a lot of the same experience. And I know that he's doing photography in the Caribbean and underwater photography and enjoying the life on the tropical life, you might say, and just a big difference from what we were doing many years before. A lot of those weeks were 50, 60, 70 hours in some cases, sometimes even more. Very heady time as organizations were just madly sucking in this technology because they wanted to do their jobs better, easier, faster, all those kinds of things. So with that, I'd like you to think about your North Star. If you have a North Star in your career that's leading you towards freelancing or anything else that's fun, would welcome the opportunity to hear about it in the chat, and even after this, we'll if you're watching the recording, happy to respond to those during the week. Just type it into the chat area there, and we'll get back to you. Reflect on some of these concepts and think about even if you didn't have a North Star from 25 plus years ago, do you have a North Star now? Is there something you're headed for, something you're shooting for? So look forward to seeing you on Tuesday night if you're in our programs, our freelance live training, and also next Freelance Friday. So have a great week freelancing. Take care.